Hey everyone, we're back and here to talk Dune Part 2.
Yes, it's Dune 2. It's Denis Villeneuve. This is Karan from Los Angeles.
And this is Alex from Los Angeles, and welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but we're both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a filmmaker, an actor, director, or other creative who shaped our love of the movies. So join us as we analyze their career, explore why they matter to us, and then review our favorite movies in their filmography. So this is a big movie, this first big movie of the year, Karan, and that's why we're doing Denny.
I know. And also, our we're making our way back into doing this in the new year with a slightly new format, which I'm sure folks who've been following us kind of got a little taste and teaser on what we're about to do in this new journey. But to start with, I want to share a few thoughts and get your take as well on just this filmmaker, Denis, and what's our relationship with them and such. So I guess for me, maybe the first movie that I really clocked of his was Sicario. I don't know, there's something about his style of obviously, pristine visual filmmaking, all departments, at least for me, cinematography, sound, etc., all working in concert. But often, when we look at filmmakers of that nature, so, the Nolans or the Kubricks of the world or what have you, where the films are technically mounted in a very beautiful and amazing kind of way, there's something about either larger than life emotionality on display or themes that are perhaps a lot easier to understand or characters that are easy to relate to. In Denis' case, I think he's sort of this complex in between filmmaker where, on one hand, these movies are kind of, and as he's gone in his career, they become bigger and bigger. And the
Mm-hmm.
technical filmmaking has always been on display. But the stories that he's chosen have always been way darker. The people and the characters that he centers his movies on have also been kind of harder to understand, harder to navigate. And I think that's, to me, that's what he is, right? Like he's playing
Mm-hmm.
on this large canvas, but making it as real and grounded as possible and not giving the audience an easy way in to the stories that he's telling and the people that he's talking about. And I find that very captivating and very interesting. And it's kind of fun to see his canvas only grow bigger and the kind of performances that he's gotten out from his actors become even more nuanced. And it's also fun to see him play a little bit outside of that darker tone as his career has gone on and bring sort of more shades of the human experience and emotionality as well. So yeah, I'm a big fan of his. I wouldn't put him in my, best of best, so kind of, top five directors yet,
Uh-huh.
but I'm definitely in the bag that okay, if a new Denis movie is coming out, I'm going to watch it for sure because I know it's going to deliver on all the things that I mentioned. How about you? What's your relationship been like with Denis Villeneuve?
Yeah, well, first I'll say I definitely agree with your analysis and sort of the category you put him as a filmmaker. I think that is definitely spot on. There's a couple more nuances that I'll give to that as I get into my sort of take on him. But for me, my first experience, and we'll get into this later in the episode more in depth, was the movie Prisoners that he did. And
Mm.
I was just so incredibly turned off by that movie in any way, like a violent, like visceral negative reaction to it. It honestly like made me try to actively avoid this filmmaker's films for the longest time because I was so turned off by that film. And it was really only until his canvas, like you said, did start expanding and he started getting more critical acclaim. Because back with Prisoners, and this is right when the movie first came out was when I saw it too. He was an up and coming director at best. He wasn't really a name yet. And then once he became a name, it was sort of hard to avoid, I guess I should say. Denny is, he had The Arrival, which had a lot of Oscar nominations. We've talked about it in the previous episode. We'll probably talk about it again today in more detail. And then he starts tackling these properties that I have an interest in. So Blade Runner, Dune, not like these aren't my favorite properties of all time, but I would have seen these movies regardless of who was making them. So I really couldn't avoid the guy anymore, basically. And it was really actually in this episode, it helped me take a bit of a step back and try to understand like why I just don't connect with him in the same way that I do with these other technical craftsmen like Nolan and Kubrick and Fincher, which I definitely put Denny in the same category in terms of the craftsman. Like he is an incredible technical filmmaker. Craft is always like at 100% with all the people that he works with. He attracts like the best talent from his
Hmm.
DPs and his actors, etc. But I think it just comes down to honestly like his worldview, at least expressed. I mean, I don't know the guy personally, but expressed through his films seems to be very pessimistic and basically highlighting all of the dark and negative sides of humanity and not really giving any hope or focus on the positives about the human experience. And I think just for me and my outlook on life and what usually I get attracted to, it's just hard for me to stomach those films, at least especially initially. Like several of these movies, Arrival and the first Dune, I'd seen more than once, and I start to kind of connect with it a little bit more. But I think there's just I prefer the not like a rosy sort of outlook of everything's perfect, but the consistently focus on the negative and usually having the bad guys win or evil not be punished. Just I think just bothers me too much, and I can't connect emotionally with his films because of that. Yeah, I don't know. It's
No,
just again, it's a different. Not that I'm knocking that. It's just that is what he does, and you connect with certain artists because their worldview is similar to yours, and he just is very the opposite, I think, of how he looks at humans, the human condition, and the world than me. So, like at best, it's interesting to see it from another perspective, but that sort of emotional connection that I get with these other directors that are similar to him, I just can't. I can't get there with him.
no, it's interesting. And actually, I never thought about it that way. I mean, I maybe I have at some level, but yeah, I'm never, at least consciously, trying to kind of, attach myself to filmmakers whose worldviews I agree with. I mean, I take it sort of more as, what is it that they're making? And if it feels truthful in terms
Hmm.
of what they're trying to say and they do it well, that's what grabs me, whether I fully, agree or not. So that's an interesting, way to kind of consume movies. And I mean, maybe we are a little bit different in that sense, which is kind of great, actually.
Yeah, and it's not that I'm saying I can't appreciate the movies.
Yeah.
It's just like that connection where I feel like, oh my
Yeah.
God, like, that orgasmic feeling of being like enthralled in some, incredible film experience.
Feel
Like I just,
seen. Yeah.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
haven't really got that with him. And it really helped this episode and the explorations we did into these other films of his, because I haven't seen a lot of them
Mm.
before, that made me do that self-reflection really on myself to see like, well, why am I not getting here? I should, on paper, he should be like
Mhm.
one of my favorite working
Yeah.
directors. Like, no question on paper. He's very similar to again Nolan, who's my favorite current working director, who works with some of my favorite DPs. But it just I don't know.
It's funny because anybody who knows me, or at least people who've listened to my movie taste, like, I like mostly movies. I mean, they're truthful and real, but I like the
Hmm.
hope. I'm, not, will never shy away from the sentimentality and the corniness of it, because I think, as Nancy Myers said, we all need a little bit corny in our lives.
Right.
I'm all for that. But
Yeah.
there's something about, I don't know, Denis, who makes these dark movies that somehow I'm on the ride for. And
Mm.
maybe because of the effort feels very sincere to me. Like it's not
It
Darren
is.
Aronofsky, where this is this dark movie and I'm going to beat this all over in your head and in your bloodstream and I'm going to bring all the bag of tricks. Like that's a turn off for me. Versus this somehow feels very sincere and lived in.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I would think for me, it's like if he is. I agree. It's very sincere, and I think that's why the technical aspect of the movies that he does is so great. It's just if he sincerely believes that humans are this bad, that just makes me sad, and like I just can't
That's true.
subscribe to that. Because I don't mind dark movies. It's not that I need to have happy endings or all
Yeah.
these sort of things, but there's a worldview piece of it. So, which I think actually reflects very well in the new movie. Dune 2, which I think actually the marriage between his worldview and the film and the material, I think actually has a very a similar they overlap a lot, which is why I responded pretty positively to this movie. But why don't we start off on your thoughts? Like, what did you think of Dune Part 2 that we just saw last night at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood?
I know. What an experience to be there on a Friday night,
On
in a
IMAX,
packed theater.
70 millimeter IMAX
Yeah.
film projecting. Yeah, packed theater. All the Dune heads and Herbert fans are all there.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
the
well,
new Worm Popcorn Bucket fans as well. I mean,
yeah,
we saw a bunch of
we
those.
saw
Yeah.
the infamous worm popcorn buckets. We did
Um,
not get them though. We just saw them just to clarify for the listeners. But
admit
yeah,
it, Alex, you wanted to get one. Admit it.
I did. I wanted to get with one. I don't know if but
Oh
that's
gosh.
another podcast.
uh, no, I love the movie. I think it was, I mean, I haven't read the books, so I'm obviously not coming to this with all the mythology and everything, and I felt this way about the first one too, and now more so with this one, which is that to pack in so much of detail and storytelling and world building and create it with this in on this epic canvas, but yet grounded in emotionality, where you understand who these people are, what their motivations are and such. It's very hard to do. I don't think many people can do that actually.
Mm-hmm.
um so just for that, I just think the movie was absolutely epic. Like, all the technical tricks are on display. I think it's maybe up levels from what we saw in the first one.
Yeah.
And then often when these movie franchises on this canvas expand and like bring in new characters and new actors, it can be a bit of a hit or miss. And I thought that the cast that was assembled for this movie and the new people who joined, they were all fantastic. It sort of felt like these are movie stars who lend themselves to the movie, or I should say movie stars in the making that lend themselves to the movie, and the movie kind of gives it back to them and
Mm-hmm.
propels them further. Like, it's very rare when you find people, the right people at the right time in their lives to kind of portray. And I think just I couldn't imagine, at least for me, anybody else. So that was amazing just to see. And then, yeah, I mean, the movie has a lot to say, that's the other thing. Like, you can pack in all the lore and the mythology, you can have great technical craftsmen and great performances, but the movie still has to kind of have something to say and hit
Mm-hmm.
you, not over the head, at least for me, but like, be clear. And, you know, I got that ambiguity and that pain where, yes, we all have a little bit of gray in us, some more
Mm-hmm.
dark, some more light. We are all challenged in some way or the other. And as the senior Reverend Mother says, there are no sides. Everybody is kind of in some sort of a plan, and they're trying to do their best, and they're paying the dues of their parents and how they shaped them, or whatever revenge event journey they were on, that's feeding us. And we are sometimes made to believe we are on the right path, and but maybe in the grander scheme we are not. Or the
Mm-hmm.
ones that visibly feel are totally wrong, they are also enslaved into something. I mean, maybe I shouldn't spoil this, but the way Stellan Skarsgård's character, like whatever happens to that, it was kind of pitiful to watch
Mm.
what happens to that person, even though that person is horrible, and probably deserves, what happens. So, and maybe that sort of is the humanity of it all, right? That, yeah, it's dark, and but in some ways everybody's on the same plane and are, a victim to their own humanity, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, their own material
Yeah.
and their own material conditions. So I never read the books either. The only experience I've had with Dune, other than the first Denny Dune film, was the Lynch Dune film, which I watched maybe 20 years ago, and that was
Uh-huh.
not a good movie. But that's all my understanding of the story. So I thought that this was more story than the first Dune. And I liked that there was more going on. That was a resolution that made more sense than in the first one. Definitely, I mean, it was a part one, so I don't want to knock it
Right.
too much for that. But I felt more there was a complete story here, and everything was dialed up a bit too. Like, it felt more epic to me,
Yeah.
this one than the first one. So I did like the movie. I liked it better than the first one, I think. And I think these two movies together are really a big positive mark in his filmography, Denny's filmography. I thought that yeah, like you said, the new characters coming in, especially Austin Butler, I think just did a phenomenal job in the
Mhm.
film. Zendaya also popped a lot
Yeah.
more. The first movie, I was disappointed that she wasn't in it very much,
Yeah.
which again, I get it was part one. But here, I thought she carried a lot of these,
Mhm.
especially the emotional scenes, the character that she plays, and the relationship and how it changes with Timothy Chalamet's character over time, and it really kind of ends on her, and her story. I think is actually, I'm now more interested in what happens with
Yeah.
her character and where that goes
Me
than
too.
what's going on with Chalamet's character, who ends up kind of turning out to be not who you thought he was,
Mhm.
essentially, which is cool and interesting. And I think again that fits back into the worldview of Denny of these messiahs can come down and they're not good, and you shouldn't be led by these people who you think can give them all the answers. And that works with this story because maybe Frank Herbert had similar
Yeah.
political positions. Again, I'm not very, I don't want to speak about Frank Herbert or the Dune novels because I don't know a lot about them, but I think this material was a good fit for Denny's worldview in a way that it made sense to me as opposed to some of his other films. I also felt that the the sense of scale in this, which was good in the first movie, was just up leveling more. I mean, the sequence of when Chalamet's character first was riding that sandworm was amazing and really
Pretty
did give me
epic.
that like, oh my God, like I'm feeling this major moment in this film and something that just especially in 70 millimeter IMAX is huge scale. It just that moment really did enthrall me in a way that I've never felt from any of Denny's movies before. Of like, whoa, this is like a real epic, big moment. That's a character moment too, where now
Right.
you're seeing that Chalamet is really becoming the master, this messiah figure that the tribesmen think he is because he's able to master the sandworm. So it like works with the
Mm-hmm.
story, the character, the emotion, but then also just visually. I was
Mm-hmm.
something that I've never seen Denny pull off like that before. I was really impressed with that sequence.
And the sound like reverberating through, at least I felt it, like you're transported. And this is where kind of filmmaking, but also like using all the technical prowess of a good movie theater, which
Hmm.
just felt so on point to me, and not because, I mean, I don't want to knock Fast and Furious movies, but
Hmm.
this is to me like the right way to kind of use a good theater in all its aspects and to really make the audiences like feel. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that roller coaster ride, quote unquote, feeling you want in a movie. But
Yeah.
for me, when that's done right, there's also like character in it too. It's not
Yes.
just totally visceral. And
Yep.
when directors, I mean, that's what makes Nolan, Cameron, Spielberg so amazing because they can do both. And I
Yeah.
think Denny, for the first time, for me at least, proved he can do that with especially that sequence and the sequence at the end, the giant battle, which I was disappointed it was very fast. They could have like this epic battle was starting. The sandworms are coming in and they're bending the bad guys, and all of a sudden they flash to like, okay, well now that the battle's over and we're gonna like have a personal, discussion with the emperor. And that was disappointing a little bit. That I would have wanted
Mm,
more of like an action set piece on the same level as what we got with the sandworm piece. But and then I guess too to get into some of the things that didn't really work for me. We talked about a little bit this last night after the film, but Chalamet is an actor who I don't like, and I've talked about that on the podcast I think before even. And I felt that he worked better in the first movie as like a snotty little rich kid who's sort of out of his element, and that was a character that he played, and then the character evolves into this like revolutionary leader slash messiah slash madman basically. And he honestly it worked better than I thought, but I still feel like they could have picked somebody else for this role and it would have worked more. I felt Chalamet, especially in this movie, was getting swallowed up by the film, was bigger than
mm.
his performance. And he just, unlike a Zendaya or Austin Butler, who they popped off the screen, or God, Javier Bardem was so good in this.
He's so good.
So good. But I don't know. I think Chalamet kind of fell, just too small. I don't know. What were your thoughts? I know you like Chalamet more, at
Yeah.
least more than I do, but
Yeah, I like him. I thought he was very good, but I do agree with the swallowing of it, and to me that's less of a Chalamet thing, but more of a Denis thing. And this is my
mhm.
only sort of thing with the movie is that some of those mini or sometimes not many set pieces in the sand, maybe there's one too many of those. Like
Mm.
I definitely felt myself like fidgeting in the seat, and I love the point you made that maybe we could have cut some of those and had maybe a more epic one in the
At the
end,
end.
perhaps.
Yeah.
But I feel like we'd seen so much of kind of sand stuff and like Brolin's intro, like, did it really have to be that? When all those things appeared, I'm like, oh my gosh, here's another one. And then, okay, at least he came out. So, like, okay, great.
Hmm.
Okay. But so there's like a lot of that stuff. And Chalamet happens to be at the center of when these things are happening, right? So he's like
Hmm.
literally physically swallowed by all the things that are happening. So I think maybe that's why you feel how you feel. At
Mm.
least that's what I felt, that if we had like maybe a few less of those, he
Mm.
would have popped more because he really popped otherwise. Like I totally saw his kind of character arc. Like he's sort of fighting all these other things and wants to be of the people, and then something turns. And the chemistry between him and Zendaya is amazing, I think. I think they
Really,
I
that
felt
didn't work
so.
for me actually. I didn't
Yeah.
feel it between them at all. The
But
love story
that's the
thing was
thing.
weird.
There's an undercurrent of something else. It's
Hmm.
not like you see that they see each other, but this is not a selfless love forever. Like there's something missing. And I
Well, he
think
claimed
that
it
to me
was.
is the point, huh?
He claimed it was, but I know he lied to me
No,
like
but
three
even
times.
he's like, I'll the way he says I love you till there's breath in me, and she's like, yeah, I'll be there till you are the way you are now. They're
Mm.
conditions. So I think that's very well captured. And that sequence when they're sitting on a sand dune and sort of kissing, and there's music, and it sort of felt like a very kind of classical movie scene with the
Hmm.
camera panning. It was beautiful, and so that was amazing. And then I have to say we can't move off of Dune 2, at least for me, without mentioning the epic kind of sword, whatever battle, hand combat battle between Butler and Chalamet, which I thought
Ah,
was absolutely breathtaking. Like no music, the whole theater was it like pin. You could hear a pin drop. It was amazing, and not just because of them, but just the way it's filmed and all the tension kind of getting to this point. And I thought that was amazing. I would rather see that as opposed to like another sunset piece, but that's just me.
yeah, yeah, that was really cool, and I liked how the first movie ended with a knife fight that
Oh
he had to
yeah.
kill someone to then
Yeah.
ascend to the next level, and in the same way, this character, Shyamalan's character too, had to kill somebody in a knife fight to then ascend to another level, and I don't know if that's supposed to be you have to kill to move up, and death is needed for some sort of progression, or I don't know. That must mean something again in the Frank Herbert Dune
Yeah.
what he's trying to say. But I liked that parallelness that both movies end just with a mano a mano knife fight,
Mm.
and you can also see Chalamet's progression too of why he's doing the fight. How he feels after the fight. I think in the first movie, it was a little more remorse of he had to kill
Yeah.
this one of the Fremen who are the tribesmen to prove himself, and he kind of felt bad about it. And this one, he's like, no, like, I'm gonna just kill Austin Butler's character because I have to do this. And obviously Austin Butler's character is a bad guy, and the other
Yeah.
person wasn't. So I guess there are some differences there, but it really shows the character progression of this character through those fights. So I agree. I thought that was really cool. So yeah, overall liked the movie, liked it better than the first one. Wasn't blown away. It wasn't like most amazing movie I've ever seen, but definitely solid. And I will be interested in the third movie, which I think they're definitely going to be making at some point.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that too, especially the way they've ended this one. I don't know what happens with the book, but it feels like it gets even more interesting, perhaps, especially with what happens with Zendaya, perhaps, and what
Hmm.
happens with Chalamet. So yeah, I'll be there for that. I liked it more than you did. I do think Dune 1 is I love that maybe more than this. And
Mm.
some of that has to do with just the circumstance, because that was like the first kind of theater experience in the after or middle, whatever, of the pandemic, whatever word you want to attach there. I guess we were still
Hmm.
in it, but it
Yeah.
was just such a rousing experience to be in a packed theater and, watch this movie on the scale and epic proportion, but also complex storytelling that I knew nothing about, but was totally swept away with. And just also, it's a bit of a coming of age movie, right? Which I'm a sucker for. And also,
Right.
there's the diversity of landscape helps, I think, into the first one. Here, we are just in the sand, and I appreciated sort of that there's like a lot happening. You're seeing a lot of the Atreides and the Harkonnens and all
Heart.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that I enjoyed the world building and the setup part of that movie.
And it sounds like you are similar to Anakin Skywalker in that you don't like sand. I think this is a theme. You just sand is like you just
Maybe less, a
it
little
gets
too
everywhere,
much. It gets
as he says
everywhere.
famously
Exactly.
in episode
Yeah.
2. Okay. So now that we've talked about Dune 2, why don't we move on to the new part of our show where we're going to get into our top threes. And these aren't our favorite movies from the filmmaker we're covering. These are three different categories we have. So the first one is our first love or first impressions. This is the movie that made that first impact on us personally, whether it was a positive or negative one. We're going to talk about our masterpiece, which is not what it's what we consider the filmmaker's best work, the one that resonates most with us, not what we think the critics might say or the box office might say. And the final one is a wild card category. This is just another movie that's important to us in some way that we feel shaped our opinions of the filmmaker that we wanted to bring forward. So we're going to go through each of our picks for these three categories. So Karan, why don't you start off then with your first love of Denny?
So my first, I probably give this away a little bit, but the first movie I saw of his was Sicario from 2015, starring Emily Blunt, Josh Brolin, Benicio del Toro. Quick logline: an idealistic FBI agent is enlisted by a government task force to aid in the escalating war against drugs at the border areas between the US and Mexico. So I went to this movie like knowing very little about it. I didn't know much about him, and I don't think I had any clue what I was getting into. And I think this is where, like, this movie to me is one of those movie going theater experiences where I was at the edge of my seat, and especially all those like border crossing scenes, which are just so visceral and
Hmm.
just they hit you in such a deep kind of, spine chilling way that it's one of those experiences where I just couldn't move from my theater seat when the movie ended because it's just such a assault, of what is happening. But I watched this movie again in prep of this episode, and what leaped at me was that there are many movies that, can be very hard hitting and that have like imagery which can be pretty gory and such. But the thing about this movie, and I guess Denis as well, as we've been talking, is that none of that stuff is sensationalized.
Hmm.
You see lynchings, you see all sorts of horrible things happen to these people, just humanity in general, but none of it is kind of glorified, or it just feels like, yeah, this could be happening near you,
Hmm.
which is the part that makes it so horrific. And then I think from a character standpoint, like the Emily Blunt character is, I haven't seen many people on film like that portrayed the way she's done it, where we see this person is very capable, but it is a little bit of a fish out of water story where maybe she's too idealistic, maybe she doesn't know exactly what's happening. She's definitely the audience surrogate because you
Of
often don't
course.
know, what is happening. But to be thrown in this world, especially somebody who looks and feels like Emily Blunt, is, I think it's new. This person is not like for the heck of it gruffed up. She's who she is and she's there, which I think is the power of the movie. Benicio del Toro, Josh Brolin, absolutely incredible. And then the tension mounts, and then I guess from we've been talking a lot about the ensemble of all departments. You see that in this movie as well. Like Roger Deakins, one of my favorite composers, Johannes Johannesson, who sadly passed away a few years ago, I think. Amazing, that blaring kind of scary score, which is a big reason of why this movie just feels so haunting and reverberating. All of those aspects like work perfectly, I think, in this movie. It's a dark tale. I hesitated to go back to watch it, but I was surprised by how much I remembered it, in my bones, which I think is a mark of a great filmmaker. So yeah, this is my first impression, and immediately I was like, okay, something else is happening over here, where it's
Hmm.
epic filmmaking, it's dark, it's real, but it's not sensationalized.
Yeah, so I'd seen this movie, I think in the theater, I'm pretty sure when it came out.
Mm,
And I had a movie that we'll get to in a sec that was my first impression, which was earlier than this. So I'd already been aware of Villeneuve. And I
mhm.
remember really, it definitely had an impact. And I think a lot of it is in this movie due to just an incredible cast from Emily Blunt to Del Toro
Mhm.
to Josh Brolin. And then also, I think this is probably out of all of Denny's films, the one with the best screenplay. I just
I
think the
agree.
story is just so well done and
So
really taut,
tight.
so tight, but yet there's so many moments, and this I think comes through the acting performances that say a lot without having to say anything, especially through Emily Blunt, who is just great in this.
Amazing.
And yeah, like yes, like I was mentioning before, like the sort of pessimistic and negative worldview that he has, I think marries well with this story too that they're trying to tell, which is in a really tough situation, with the drug war in Mexico and the things that the United States is doing to essentially like encourage it and kind of make it worse because that's what they're
Yep.
trying to do. And a lot of like double crosses and CIA agents being bad and all this hitmen, all this kind of stuff. And I think that for a tale like this and a subject matter like this, like that pessimism and cynicism works a little bit more.
Yeah.
It's very similar, I think, to like No Country for Old Men, essentially, with
Hmm.
Emily Blunt's character being like, I can't participate. I was a law enforcement officer, but this is the world is a lot worse than I thought it was. And so I think that theme is runs through this very well. And yeah, the other thing, you're mentioning like Deakins as the DP,
Mm.
that one sequence where they're going through the tunnels
Oh,
the is just so well shot and just gorgeous with like as the sun is setting in the desert and they're going to
yeah.
these tunnels to do a raid on where the drug dealers are taking drugs through underneath these tunnels into the United States. just an incredible sequence, really terrifying and taut, and definitely a very effective thriller. I think this is like no wonder after seeing this you were like, oh my gosh, who is this filmmaker? I
Yeah,
have to follow him.
yeah. And one more thing I would say is that I love the that you put this movie as a thriller because it is. And I think one of the things that makes it that is the slow reveal of what
Hmm.
it just builds and builds, right? Right from the beginning. And that kind of edge of your seat quality comes through that. Like even in the first sequence, when you see those kind of bodies in the walls of this house, it's
Right.
just unbelievable, not something you expect at all. And it's just so cleverly done across the board where you never know what's really happening, but yet you're with the people and in the place.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's important because if it's too much of kind of you don't know what's happening, you wouldn't care. I wouldn't care. And you
Right.
care.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of that too is Emily Blunt, and
Yeah.
that being the audience surrogate, but also just how she handles these situations. It just
Mm-hmm.
it makes it easier to stomach the movie, I guess, in a way, because there is a
Mm-hmm.
sympathetic character in there who you're like, you get why she's trying to, get more involved, but then has to pull back. So there's at least a character that you can identify with, and
Right.
not have to just be everyone being a bad guy. You know,
Exactly. And
she's got some
critical.
humanity.
Yeah. Critical. Yeah. Okay, what is your first love of Denis Villeneuve?
So my first love, though I'll kind of reclassify this as first impression, is a 2013 movie called Prisoners. This IMDb plot summary: when Keller Dover's daughter and her friend go missing, he takes matters into his own hands as the police pursue multiple leads and pressure mounts. So this was a movie that I saw on video or at home, maybe like the year it came out, or maybe a year after. This is the first time I'd ever heard of or seen anything by Denis, and it was because several of my friends were like, "Oh my God, this movie's incredible! You have to watch it." And like I was teasing in the opening, I just had such a visceral, like negative reaction to this movie. It was like drinking poison or something that I just was like, whoever this person is, this director, I can never stomach anything that he kind of does again. And I think so. To get more a little bit into the plot, so Hugh Jackman plays the main character whose daughter does get kidnapped, and he has there in this town. There's a sort of mentally challenged person who he thinks is the suspect that kidnapped the kid, even though the police have no evidence, and he ends up kidnapping him and essentially torturing him in just really horrific ways that the movie shows, to
Mm-hmm.
try to get him to to confess to the crime and to tell him where his kids are. And it was an interesting character study, right? Like, what lengths will you go to try to save your child in terms of what Hugh Jackman ends up doing? But not only is he complicit in torture of this person who, yeah, it turns out to be innocent, but even if he wasn't, was this still something that you should be condoning? Pulling in then his friend whose also daughter was taken, pulling him into his sort of this down into the darkness of what he's dealing with, pulling in then that person's wife, and then even the police officer played by Jake Gyllenhaal is sort of trying to do what's right. And then even him sometimes goes in kind of into the dark side, which again, all this being said, does make for an interesting movie in terms of moral quandaries. But what I think makes this hard for me to stomach, not only those horrible torture scenes of him torturing Paul Dano, who's the suspect, but
Mm-hmm.
Hugh Jackman, the movie almost doesn't take a stance on passing judgment on him in any way. The movie quickly becomes, okay, well, now it's just a normal sort of like Seven knockoff, like the Fincher film at the end where Jake Gyllenhaal finds the real killer and, wins, gets the killer, arrested or dies. I can't remember what happened. Like, it solves the crime, but the movie never really kind of properly goes back, I think, to the Hugh Jackman piece and punishes him in any meaningful way. Because that to me is like Hugh Jackman's almost more the villain than even the child kidnapper in this movie in terms of what he puts Paul Dano through, which you don't really even get to see the after effects of that either. The movie kind of drops the Hugh Jackman torturing Paul Dano piece and just goes right into just a normal kind of cat and mouse cop thriller. So I think that is what just I was like, no, you have to. If you're not taking a stance on what Hugh Jackman did, are you condoning what he did? And then that just what doesn't sit well with me.
Mm-hmm.
What's your impression of this film, and when did you see it?
Yeah, I think I probably saw it on video, meaning at home, like after Sicario, I think, because I then seeked it out. I'd heard it was a very hard watch, and it was a very hard watch. I don't think I'm ever watching that movie again.
Hmm.
But like you said, was blown away, of course, by the filmmaking and kind of the tension of it all. The performances are great across the board.
They
It
are,
kind of,
yes.
sucks you in this vortex that, so you can't leave once you're in it for sure. But I agree with you. Like the torture stuff, it's too much. Who is a fan of watching that, I suppose, but
There are some
maybe
people
I guess
probably.
some people are. So that was it's a lot,
Hmm.
and but I agree with you. I wouldn't frame it as that, oh, he should have been punished, but I would have loved to see Hugh Jackman sort of deal with the ramifications of this, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
where are you at now after everything that you've done and the people that you dragged in? What has this done to your psychology and where are you at? Like, I think that
Hmm.
would have been nice to see, and that's not at all tying something in a neat bow at all.
No,
Like it
no.
actually makes the movie
Right.
more complex. So I think you can sort of see that this director is still maybe coming of age and sort of figuring things out. Or who knows, maybe this was like a producer note that they wanted to then come in and make this cat and mouse movie and that's
True.
it. And who knows? I sort of want to believe like Denis would want to tell a more complex story, but ultimately it doesn't end up being that. That said, everything leading up to it and the complexities of what these people are doing and who's in the wrong and who's in the right, that's all there,
Yes,
and
it
you can
is.
sort of make your own judgments on where you stand. And if you're,
Yeah, that's definitely true, and I like movies that are, ambiguous to that and letting the audience decide. I think kind of what you were touching on earlier, the failing of this movie for me is the fact that we should see the impact of Hugh Jackman's decisions on him and then on Paul Dano more viscerally. So then we can decide, was it worth the cost to Hugh
Mhm,
Jackman's quote unquote soul or the horrible things that they did to Paul Dano's body, which they don't even show. So that to
mhm,
me almost makes me feel like the movie's taking a stance of saying, well, this is clearly fine because look, Hugh Jackman's probably going to be rescued at the end, and yeah, Paul Dano's fine. There's a newspaper article, his face on it. It's fine. It's fine. And that whether it was a studio note, like you said, or just what the writer or Denny wanted to do, like that, I think is what rubbed me the wrong way in this film. But
mhm.
I'm glad I eventually got over this and saw some of his other films. 'Cause I do enjoy them. And speaking of enjoying, what is your masterpiece in your mind from Denny?
Yeah, so I've touched on this movie in the past, so I'll keep this one, I guess, on the briefer side. But my masterpiece of his is Arrival from 2016, starring Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, Forrest Whitaker. Quick logline: a linguist works with the military to communicate with alien life forms after 12 mysterious spacecrafts appear around the world. And I think, to me, this movie is definitely an up leveling for him, especially in terms of, scale and scope of storytelling, but also what you touched on, that his movies prior to this were definitely way darker. And this is actually a very hopeful movie in the sense where this like catastrophic thing is happening, and the point of view of the movie is of that of kindness and listening to each other and communicating with each other, whoever that might be, alien beings or
Hmm.
people here on Earth, and trying to solve our differences and come together for the greater good. It's also a mother-daughter story, which lends like a totally different angle to it. And yet it is mysterious. Like you don't fully grab everything. There's sort of, flash forward, flashback things happening in the movie.
Hmm.
And then I can't sort of walk away by not mentioning Amy Adams' performance, which I think totally grounds the movie because so much of this movie is just in her eyes and just kind of in her breath because not much is said of what's going on. And that's true to the character, like how she works, but also the story that's happening around her. And then I've never seen kind of alien interaction and the scriptures that we see between these aliens and how they communicate ever done that way. Like it's just such a masterwork of just depicting that, I think, and not doing it just for like, oh, how cool is it, but it's very much part of the story. It's
Hmm.
emotional, actually. There's it sort of landed on me in a very emotional way, and at the same time being really, really cool, which is again hard to pull off. So yeah, to me, like this feels like his masterpiece so far, where
Hmm.
the technicality, the emotional storytelling, the realism of it, yet the science fiction of it all, it kind of comes together. That's my favorite of his and a masterpiece in my mind.
Yeah, yeah. And for listeners, if you want to hear more thoughts as we talk through Arrival, we did it in a previous episode, cover it. I think it was our episode on meaning of life, I believe. I had seen this movie in theaters actually, because even though I was not a Denny fan, this got so much acclaim, and I like, hard science fiction like this. I did went to see it, and it was okay upon first watch. And now that I've watched it, again for the podcast, it's sort of grown on me a little bit, especially our discussion around the themes of this movie being about communication, which I do think is an optimistic view of people just need to talk to each other. And I think that is the message of this movie. And yes, it unlocks this power of then you can see into the future with the alien language if you understand it, but the aliens are forcing humans to talk to one another. And despite our differences, which I do think is a very positive message and something that any situation, if you have a disagreement or there's a misalignment, the first step is you just got to talk. Because if you're not going to talk, you're never going to sort it out. It's always going to lead to disaster. And I think communication is one of our biggest gifts as just a species, too. Like we can communicate on levels that other animals, at least at this point on Earth, can't. Not that they can't communicate with each other, but we can do it at an even higher level and communicate other things. So I do think that that is very an important message, and I liked that the movie was talking about that. And I think you're totally right in terms of up leveling his career. This one definitely did. I think that the piece that maybe this will take me even more times to kind of grok this a little bit, but there is sort of this other message of the film because of Amy Adams' character as she's learning this language, and that the secret of the alien language is you can then essentially see into the future or experience
Yeah.
time non-linearly, and that she realizes in the future she's gonna have a child and the child's going to die, and then it's going to ruin her marriage. And she decides then to, have the child anyway, which I think is a cool message of like, yes, there's ups and downs in life, but it's about, the highs sometimes come lows, but you don't want to erase the highs just because you don't want to deal with the lows. But then there is this sort of issue about, or not, it's a statement potentially on like predestination. Like she was only seeing one vision of her future. Does that mean she didn't have the power to change it at all? And this just was going to happen and she just had to go into it anyway? Or did she have agency in her life? And I think that was an interesting point the movie was raising, and maybe saying you don't have agency, I guess, because she had no choice, I think, but to experience this. Which I do feel that you have certain things. You're in a box. Like society puts you in a box. If you don't have an infinite number of choices in life because of the structures that we're under, but you do have some agency in it. And I thought that was a little bit sad, I guess. And I felt like, what, does she have no choice here? Or I don't know if you read into that the same thing I did of like, this is the thing that's going to happen and it's how she deals with it, or if she had an agency in changing it. Did you get that sense from that?
Yeah. I mean, to me, it sort of feels like you have agency in terms of the choices you make, but not the outcomes they have.
I see.
You know,
Which is
so the
true.
choice,
Yeah.
yeah, the choice she made was that, yeah, I want to go with this, but I can't really control what ends up happening eventually. And that's
Mhm.
sort of that.
Yeah, which is life.
Yeah,
I
which
think
is
that's
life.
why it fits so well in our meaning of life episode, or
Yeah.
that yeah, you can't control those. You can't control the outcomes. You can control the choices.
Mm-hmm.
Which is cool. But I think yeah, this movie definitely is worth seeing if folks haven't seen it, or even if you were like me and have an aversion to Denny for any particular reason. This is a movie that is still worth checking out. Like I said, the more times I see it, the more I understand how special a movie it is, even if I wasn't completely blown away by it even now, as much as I think you are to call it like his masterpiece, but it's a movie that I think will stand the test of time for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
I think so too. And, we've seen so many science fiction movies just in that, like how it's constructed. Like
Hmm.
it's so hard to shock us, jaded audiences of, what alien forms might look like or what
Right.
spaceships might look like and how will they show up and what have you. And I think this movie surprises, and that's a big part of it, right? Like otherwise, how will you tune in,
Right.
And so I think the movie pulls that up, but then I think delivers more so on the emotionality and the depth of it. It's a very quiet movie for the subject matter. Like a movie like this, I mean, it's Independence Day, right? Like done in a
Right.
totally different way. Like, can you imagine these two movies side by side? Like, it's nuts, right?
Yeah, welcome
That's
to
how we would,
Earth. You just
yeah,
punch the cephalopod or whatever. That's what Will Smith
basically.
would do. Ooh, actually, that sounds really bad too. Speaking of Will Smith,
I
he
know.
probably would slap it instead of punch it now. But sorry, yeah, sorry, Will Smith.
So it's amazing that a movie like this exists, which can be quieter and have all this breadth to it and makes you think and feel pretty amazing. All right, what is your masterpiece of Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah, so it continues a lot of the themes that you were talking about. So mine is Dune, which I kind of want to cheat and sort of put the two movies together in a way and call them like one project. But in the
Yeah,
same way that you were saying that Arrival was an up leveling for him and getting him on a bigger canvas, this is that even times 10, as big as Arrival was in terms of the
definitely.
tools that he has. And I think just from a again a technical achievement, this is something that requires like top-notch filmmaker to pull off and to bring in all the top-notch craftsmen and production design, score, everything. And it was editing, etc., cinematography, and it all works on this level. And despite my, aversion to him, I think this is such a successful adaptation and presentation of the material that I kind of gets beyond a little bit of my apprehension to him. And I think too, much like I was saying, the Sicario is sort of a good his worldview matching material. I think this is similar in the sense of this is not a it's an examination of the hero's journey, not the typical hero's journey of like a Harry Potter or Luke Skywalker or what we're used to,
Mhm.
what we want to get as an audience. You want to see a hero go through trials and tribulations and at the end become a good person and defeat the enemy and etc. And that's not what Frank Herbert's Dune is about. It's actually about the opposite. It's about the hero being the bad guy. And I think that matches well with Denis Villeneuve's worldview potentially, and that's why the movie then works for me. It's not fighting against that tension at all. And going back and rewatching Dune actually ahead of Dune 2, really the movie is a lot more effective to me. Like the pacing worked more, the story I understood, and I thought again after Dune 2 too, those two things together as sort of one project, I think is something that I don't know if another filmmaker could have accomplished it, and that's why I have to say this is
Mhm.
his masterpiece because of that.
Yeah, well said. I agree. I don't think anybody can accomplish this. And I think it's like we've been saying, it's the complexity of the dense storytelling, the world building, the epic nature of it, but yet making it real. And when I say real, it is that kind of gray, right? That, yeah,
Hmm.
things are not what they seem to us and just from within, but also externally. And that's what these movies are about. And maybe
Hmm.
you're right. Maybe his worldview is like that, of kind of that. I wouldn't call it too pessimistic, especially after these recent movies, Arrival onward. Like before that, yeah, definitely very, very dark.
Hmm.
But to me, this sort of feels more like how life is, right? That yeah, we are enslaved to some or the other bigger structure or power or our own guilt or how we were raised, but it also doesn't make us all evil. It's not so black and white. It's kind of what these movies are. So, but yeah, the thing that I keep coming back to is just the spectacle of it, just underlined with the emotion of it. And I think that's
Hmm.
just so hard to do, and telling these complex stories, which somebody like me who's not really into science fiction and such, I would definitely tune out.
Hmm.
I'm somebody who's not watched a single episode of Game of Thrones, which
Oh,
is
really? Oh, you
yeah, which is
should. You
I know
definitely should. Yeah.
I'm sure I love it once I got
Yeah.
into it, but this sort of material doesn't necessarily attract me. And the fact
Mm.
that I was fully with it, followed it, got into it like that, it's just I think the credit goes to him and who he assembled. So yeah,
Yeah.
makes
No,
sense that you would put this as his masterpiece.
yeah, and well, we'll see if what the third one, which I
Yeah,
think he will be involved in, sort of if that completes the story that he wants to tell, or how that works with these two. But I do feel like these two at least will be remembered as a successful, like major sci-fi epic, which is something that is hard to find
yeah.
nowadays. Outside of Avatar, I can't really think of something along this level that's not just considered like recycled, you know, IP that we're just churning out, even though the original artist is no longer involved. I think he's like these movies remind me more of James Cameron in a way, in terms of like what you were saying, where the epicness matches the story and the emotion, which is impressive to pull off. It's very few directors could do it, and I was thought Denny did.
Yeah. Except in that case, the cheesiness is cheese. I mean, the emotionality is the cheese, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, it depends on the movie. Yeah, with Avatar, you can say that, but I think that is just again the more positive. Like Cameron is definitely a more of an optimist on humanity and wants to inspire people to be the best in them, even though it
Yeah.
might not be a reflection of the current world, but you want, at least for my movies, I want to have them, the messages be aspirational to help me be better instead of just be like, yeah, this is what the world is. And it's like, oh, that's sad. Like, why even get up in the morning? But no,
That's true.
I hear you. Avatar could be another conversation we'll have. I'm
We've
sure
already
they'll,
talked about it. I'm
we
not
could
getting
never
into that
stop
again.
talking about Avatar. But so then let's move on to the next category then, which is wild card. So this is a movie that we want to bring forward that is something interesting, whether it's positive or negative about the director and your experience with him. So what is your wild card for Villeneuve?
So I actually put Dune 1 on this because as somebody who was following his career, I guess now in retrospect, and you articulated too, like this material and as his scale kept growing over time, it no shocker that he made this. But at that time, I don't think he'd really made something like this. And I guess
Mm-mm.
Blade Runner 2049 was a little bit of a
Little.
intro, yeah, into this world, but he hadn't made like a big piece of, writing that people are so aware of and are in love with. It's sort of in your own Star Wars sort of franchise, if you will. He hadn't done that. So I think it was pretty bold and it could have gone wrong. And, I don't think when I was watching Sicario and being totally scared for all the people involved on screen, I don't think I would have imagined that this is what he would have done. So to me, this is a wild card. Like to me, like
Mm,
all the other movies of like the ones he made, like Enemy and such, they're very much in line with the trajectory he was on if he had just
mm,
stayed there.
mm-hmm.
And the fact that he made this zag but did it in a very kind of earned methodical way by just incrementally stepping up as he kept going up and then kind of just went for the big kahuna as they say and delivered it. That's why to me this is a wild card because sometimes wild cards can be huge bets
Yeah.
which may not always land. Typically, wildcards are kind of offbeat things, as people might think of it, but I went for the big one.
I think that's a really interesting point you made about a zag. And I think it is out of like not what you would think if you looked at his filmography that he would accomplish something like this. But then in thinking back on the movies that he made, the DNA is kind of there.
Yeah,
It
it
was
makes
funny, like
sense.
Arrival deals with this. We were just talking about projection of the future, and there's all
Right.
these visions in Dune and Dune 2 about future and how that affects the present. So it's like the pieces were there, but I never would have seen them that they were. And
No.
I don't think even Denis probably knew he was building towards this, but he was
Yeah.
doing the right training with all the rest of his films that we were talking about today too into delivering something like Dune, which I don't think anyone else could have delivered. So I think that's it is a zag, but like in a way, maybe he was predestined
Yeah.
to do this.
Oh.
So for me, the wild card choice that I made was Blade Runner 2049. So this is a film he made in 2017. The IMDb plot summary: young Blade Runner K's discovery of a long buried secret leads him to track down former Blade Runner Rick Deckard, who's been missing for 30 years. I brought this in here because, again, this movie on paper to me should have really resonated. I'm a fan of the first Blade Runner. We have Roger Deakins, one of my favorite DPs, was involved. Hans Zimmer was doing the score. It's a movie that had been rumored for a really, really long time. The Blade Runner sequel, what would they do? And it just like didn't work for me. And I think help me realize like why there's this like disconnect between me and Denny visually. I think I want to talk a little bit about that piece of it too, because again, Deakins is one of my favorite DPs, cinematographers. Shot a lot of my favorite movies, a lot of Coen movies,
Hmm.
etc. And I have to say that it must be something about how Denis like sets up a shot like visually. His eye just isn't the same. This isn't the same as mine in terms of what I want to see visually. And this is the movie that because I was anticipating, oh my God, it's Blade Runner, it's Deakins shooting this. And it's not to knock it. This is something that's kind of hard to kind of articulate. I think with this, it's either like you are in love with how someone shoots something or you're not, or what a director's eye is. So, like, for example, like a Michael Mann or Terrence Malick for me, I mean, they could shoot people crossing the street, and I would think it's the most amazing thing in the world. Like, it's not really even about the material, just how they look at the world, like, does it for me. And this movie was like, for me, it's like, okay, well, Denny doesn't. And it was actually kind of surprising in Dune 2 was the first time there were a couple visual moments that I felt that like, holy shit, like this is incredible, like visually. And I've never felt that from any of his other movies, even when he's working with my one of my favorite cinematographers in Blade Runner 2049, which upon rewatch still just is kind of boring to me and
Yeah.
not interesting really at all. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Blade Runner
But
2049?
so can I ask, like, visually, the thing that felt like a mismatch or what have you for this specific movie, like, what is it?
It's again, it's hard to articulate, but the shots just seem to me like kind of flat, not interesting. The camera movements aren't directing my eye in the way that I would want them to go. Again, it's hard for me really to articulate this. It's like it's like a painting, right? You look at a painting and sometimes it speaks to you, and sometimes
Mm,
it doesn't. And you can't really describe why. And it's just interesting having a DP that normally, like, I love what Deakins does, and I guess. And now I'm thinking, well, it must be how Villeneuve likes to compose his shots that it just, not that I don't like it, but it doesn't really give me that extra oomph that other directors, like I mentioned, that are very visual. Because as I mentioned in the podcast before, like movies are to me like more of a visual medium than anything else. So I really gotta like be in love with how they're shot. That's why I keep mentioning DPs and cinematographers all the time because it's in a way that I kind of tackle
hmm
films. And it's just I don't for me, just Denny and I don't line up in that. Again, not that I'm saying he's bad at it. It's just not what I would
mm.
like.
Interesting. Yeah, for me, like visually, this movie felt amazing, and I'm, no scholar on cinematography, but it felt like the world building and the transportive nature of it, and kind of just getting lost in where they're at, like that all felt amazing to me. I think to me, and I agree, the movie sort of feels kind of boring, and it felt
Hmm.
boring when I watched it, and probably have very little intention to rewatch it over time. Maybe I should though.
Yeah.
But to me, like the boring part of it comes from obviously the storytelling and pacing, but then also the performance, I think this is
Yeah.
my time where I started to really just be bored of Gosling in general. Of
Hmm.
like, okay, you're brooding and you're sort of, kind of in on the joke or what have you, and everything is sort of serious and, First Man and this one. And I don't know, it just felt like back to back of the same kind of droopy character, like walking around.
Mm.
That to me was, not fun and interesting. And then whatever Jared Leto is doing, as
Yeah.
he's always doing in most
Yeah.
of the movies that he's in. Not to say what he's doing is bad, but I think often it seems like filmmakers don't know how to use him or calibrate the movie around him. Then often he's described as, yeah, he's in like a different movie. Like that's
Yeah.
often is what is said about him. And once again here, I was more interested in the movie when he came because I was
Mm.
finally, awakened, but at the same time it's sort of jarring. So I don't know. And look, the first Blade Runner was not a big success when it came out. It took a lot of time for it to develop. It's also slow and kind of takes us time and such. So
True.
I don't know. Maybe this one over time will land on me differently. But yeah, I'm not fan of this one.
So interesting on the performances. Actually, on this rewatch, the only performance that really popped for me is Ana de Armas was just
She's great.
great in this, and their relationship was the only thing I kind of cared about in the movie.
But I was going to say that I think, as we said before, this movie is important because it's a critical, incremental, huge incremental step towards Dune. And
True.
for
True.
that, I'm appreciative that this is in his filmography. Like he got to tackle something of this size, a much beloved property that's not
Right.
entirely his own,
Hmm.
and keep that going. And there's probably no Dune without this. And
That
I'm happy that he got to try this one out and then got to Dune as opposed to trying Dune directly, and maybe it wouldn't have worked as well. I'm clearly you can see this is a very smart filmmaker who learns from the stuff he's trying and then applies it. So for that, I give him a lot of points.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think he had not worked with IP before this, and
No,
Dune is obviously a massive IP, so maybe this helped get him his feet wet in that world of playing. I mean, not that he's done adaptations before. Like
right,
I think both of the movies we just were talking about before this were
right,
adaptations, Prisoners and Arrival. But yeah, I think that's a really good progression for him towards this. It's like everything leads to Dune. It
yeah,
seems like is what we're saying. But hey, that's nothing wrong with that. Dune's good. So.
exactly.
So now that we're done going over the top three, why don't we? This is a fun segment we have where we just talk about what we think the filmmaker we'd love them to see them do next. So we'll play their agent for a little bit. So Karan, if you were sitting down with Denny, what would you be like? Oh, Denny, you really should be doing this. What do you think?
I would want him to come back to like Earth in like relative current time. Like
Hmm.
I sort of feel like he's been in the science fiction intergalactic world for like a while now. It'll be fun to see him come back to the Sicario world, not necessarily US Mexico border, but like
Right.
contemporary world, but apply whatever he's learned as a filmmaker, as a human being, through all these past years where he's played with a bigger canvas, he's played with more depth of emotionality, more colors of, the human condition, not just all dark. It'll
Hmm.
be fun to see him come back and apply that to a more smaller story, but hard hitting at the same time. So
Mm.
not necessarily a family drama, but maybe maybe a contemporary thing that we are all fighting with. I would think he would have an interesting way into that. Yeah, any contemporary issue, take that and make something around that with a very human point of view, but that's also expansive in scale. Okay, there. I finally said it
Got
and
it.
I said what I wanted to say.
So for me, other than I think he should complete the Dune trilogy and do
Yeah,
Dune
of
3, which
course.
is doing. I'm in a way like I'm thinking something the exact kind of flip of that of he's
Mm.
never really done something in the past that at least I'm aware of. Like I'm not super familiar with his early filmography, but sort of take on like a Ridley Scott type sort of historical epic or
Oh.
historical drama. I want the scale. I think he can now that he can do the scale. I don't want him to go smaller again. I want him to continue to operate because few filmmakers can, but just take it to the past and some historical battle or historical event, no matter what the culture, maybe outside of even Western culture, because he can do, the Dune is all obviously made up stuff. But I'd love
Mm.
to see what he would do, like again, like a Ridley Scott type historical epic, which is a genre I like too. But I think it'd be interesting to see what he would do to that and how he would apply his worldview to the past.
That's amazing. It's funny because as I was thinking about Dune, even watching it last night, like there's so much of kind of Indian mythology and such that I grew up with, right? That's kind of
Mm.
peppered
Oh,
in the
cool.
costuming and obviously spice and all of that. And for I even thought about that there are these great works of Indian mythology. I mean, it'll be tricky for like a foreign person to come and do that, but maybe he collaborates with some people and creates like, an epic
Oh.
movie around that. Like, oh, that would be amazing.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like that was just interesting to see if he could take that to the past. What do we have coming up, Karan? So now hopefully listeners loved our new format. We're back. And what are we doing next? What are our next full episode?
All right, so next week we're going to talk about the Oscars because that's what's coming up, but also share our top three films of 2023. And then back to our regular programming, we'll touch another little known filmmaker who we all know and love, Nolan. I think it's pretty fitting to cover him after Denis.
That's right, actually. Yes. And hope not hopefully. Actually, I will say hopefully coming off an Oscar win that he's gonna get on
Oh,
Oscar
for
night.
sure.
I
I
am
mean,
very
I
excited
would
for him
be
then.
very surprised if that does not happen. He's
Yes.
getting one for sure,
Right. Oh,
if
that
not
is true.
more.
First, exactly, exactly. So that episode will come back 2 weeks from today. So Wednesday, March 20th, we'll have the Nolan episode because we're back to our every other week format. But hopefully everyone watches the Oscars along with us next week. And very interesting show, I think. I'm excited to watch it, excited to talk about it, and excited to hear what your favorite movies are of last year.
Me too. Well, so hopefully you enjoyed this discussion on Denis. And as always, please give us your feedback through comments or reviews on YouTube, but also on various podcasting platforms. Also, if you have thoughts on Denis and what he should do next or what he shouldn't do next, we're all ears on that. But yeah, until next time, see you soon.
See you soon.
Drink the blue water. What is it called?
I don't know. Like worm essence or something?
Worm juice.
Worm juice. Yeah.
Yeah. I would like to summon people with that voice that they
Yeah.
have, the Bene Gesserit. I just love that.
That would be cool. Yeah. It's like,
Speak.
yeah,
Yeah,
speak now. Yeah.
I love that.
Subscribe now.